So I think DmC Devil May Cry is one of those games that is really weird to look back on, and I think a lot of people misunderstand it and misunderstand how it was received by the fan base. The game dropped in 2013, and it was intended to be a reboot of Capcom's Devil May Cry series, but it took it in a completely different direction. Prior to this game, Devil May Cry was very much a Japanese game, made and developed by Japanese teams and published by Capcom, who are a Japanese company. And so basically, Capcom was not happy with the sales of Devil May Cry 4, and so they handed it off to Ninja Theory to reboot it. And Ninja Theory are a Western developer based in the UK, and Capcom basically handed it to them and said, do your own thing with it. From what I understand, Capcom encouraged Ninja Theory to go off in a completely different direction that was unlike the rest of the series and to make it their own. But obviously, and this should be obvious to literally anyone, if you have an established franchise or series that people love, and then you go and you just twist it and change it and modify it into something completely different, people aren't going to like that. And so I think that the general consensus on DmC Devil May Cry at this point in time is that it is a good game, just not a good Devil May Cry game. But the thing is that whenever I was recently playing through it, I was just struck by so much frustration with it. And the reason why is because all the parts are there for the makings of a great game. There are so many things about it that are legitimately great, and I can't help but feel that even though the game is very different from Devil May Cry, if they had tweaked certain things, then it could have been not just a great game, but a great Devil May Cry game. As it stands, I think the game is good. I think that there's a lot of cool stuff with it, but ultimately, like I said, it's just very frustrating for me to play, especially as a longtime Devil May Cry fan. And so basically with this video, I wanted to dive into all of the reasons why I think DmC Devil May Cry could have been great.
Let's rock, baby.
So the first thing I wanted to talk about, of course, is the main character, Dante. Pretty much from the very first reveal trailer, Dante did not look like Dante. Dante has white hair and a red jacket, and he doesn't smoke. And then in the initial reveal trailer, you have a guy who looks like a meth head who smokes. I mean, I guess that's kind of as good of a description as any. But really, the main character is kind of unrecognizable. Typically speaking, that's not really how reboots go. You know, you may not like Robert Pattinson's interpretation of Batman, for instance, but still you recognize him as Batman because he looks like Batman. But then if you put up a picture of Dante from the original series and then Dante from the reboot, they really don't look anything alike. But more than just the overall look of the characters, they don't act anything alike. Dante in the original Devil May Cry was intended to be cool, and he was intended to be cool without having to smoke or drink. And that's kind of a big thing for the original games and the original developers. And so right off the bat, the way Dante is introduced in the game is you see him at a strip club, and he's drinking, and then he hooks up with some chicks who are dressed like angels, who are strippers, and he takes them back to his trashy trailer. And so whenever you're looking at this, this is what Ninja Theory thought was cool. And I don't know, it's kind of like gross and skeezy. I think that you are going to have a significant portion of the population who looks at the idea of having a threesome with some random strippers. You know, they're going to look at that and be like, this is awesome. But then, I don't know if that's going to appeal to the original fans who just thought that Dante was awesome because he ate pizza. You know what I mean? Like, there's a big gap. Because in the original games, Dante is the wacky wahoo pizza man, right? He, like, kills guys whenever he's eating pizza, and he does flips and whatever else. He fights guys with a motorcycle, and he rides a motorcycle up the side of a giant demon tower sticking out of the ground. And it's kind of absurd and over the top, and that's why we love him. Basically, Dante, the original version, just feels like a cartoon character. He feels like Bugs Bunny in a lot of ways. And so then the way that we are introduced to this new Dante is it's like, oh yeah, he's hungover from the night before, and he answers his door in the nude. And this is one thing that really stood out to me, especially in the first half of the game, is he's just not charismatic at all. Some of his voice lines just sound like so emotionless and just dead on the inside.
Who are you? What do you want?
You were careless. You left a trail. Now he's on to you.
What are you talking about? Who's on to me?
And so this version of Dante is going to appeal to a certain degree of the population, but for me, he just kind of comes off as a scumbag. He just kind of comes off as gross. You know, he wakes up and immediately drinks, and as someone who does not drink, I don't know, that's not very cool. Every now and then, Dante does have a good one-liner or a good joke. He does say something funny.
Well, Bob, now I get why your point of view is so upside down. Hey, Bob, put a spin on this.
But this occurred to me really that what's lacking for the character is a save the cat moment. Basically, if you're not familiar with the term, it just refers to a moment where you have an unlikable protagonist and then you have them do something nice to show that they have a heart. So for instance, you have them save a cat from a tree. And basically the point of the save the cat moment is to help make your protagonist a little bit more likable. Because really in this game, they're trying to tell the story of how Dante went from being a rebellious jerk to caring about people and caring about humans. But the issue is that we're not given a reason to like him in the first place. And so that's really the point of the save the cat moment, right? Is you just give someone a little bit of something, so that way they are attached to the character and that way they are invested in the character's growth. So an example of this can actually be found in Iron Man. In the original movie, at the very beginning, Tony Stark is a weapons stealer and he's like, you know, that's gross, basically. If you're a weapons stealer, like seriously. And Tony Stark at the beginning of the movie, he just is showing off weapons and he's like, look at how cool this is, it can kill so many people. And it's been a while since I've seen that movie, but I do think that Tony Stark has a save the cat moment whenever he takes a picture with the soldier. The soldier wants to take a selfie with him, and Tony Stark says, sure. And then of course Tony's very charismatic and funny and he says no gang signs, and then he's like, just kidding, throw up all the gang signs, I don't care. And then of course as the movie goes on, basically Tony Stark realizes, oh, maybe it's a bad idea to make weapons. Maybe it's a bad idea to sell weapons to the Taliban. And he grows as a character and he becomes invested in his father's business and blah blah blah. But really Tony Stark should be unlikable because again, he's a weapons stealer and he's directly responsible for a lot of deaths. But he's not unlikable, you know, because of that charisma and because of that save the cat moment. And it's because of that moment where he takes a selfie and where he's nice to the soldiers, and it's because of those moments basically that make him a suitable candidate for carrying like 27 movies or however many movies are in the MCU. And so really this version of Dante, just not even from the perspective of someone who loves the original Dante, but just from the perspective of a character that needs to grow and change, he's lacking that save the cat moment, I think. But again, I think that the entire like sleeping with strippers is supposed to be sort of something similar to that, because I think that we're supposed to look at that and go, wow, this guy's awesome. Whoa, maybe if I go and dress up like Dante, I can sleep with some strippers. And so maybe that's what they were going with that. All in all, Dante in this game is just not all that much like the original version of Dante, except in one area, which is the Freudian thing. Basically what I mean by that is that in the original game, Dante meets Trish, who is a demonic clone basically of his mother, and she looks exactly like his mother, and then he just hangs out with her, and it's unclear if they're in a relationship or not. I think the general consensus is that like they're just friends, but they're very close. However, some people do interpret it as the original Dante having mommy issues. And so basically the way this connects back to angel strippers is that you realize, you learn this in like the third level, that Dante's mother in this game is an angel. And so his mom is an angel and he's sleeping with chicks dressed like angels. And Freud, that's all I gotta say. Next up, let's talk about Vergil for a bit. So basically the original Vergil is supposed to be this guy obsessed with power. He's obsessed and hurt. He's a character that is haunted by the deaths of his family. And he says as much in DmC 3, where he says that without power, you cannot protect anything. Basically, that's his entire thing, is that he's kind of a tragic character in a lot of ways. And so Vergil, he does kill a lot of people. You know, he is very focused on his goals and he's very focused on his mission, and he wants to attain more power. But at the same time, you do feel for him a little bit just because of that fact, because of the fact that he's driven by tragedy. And so whenever you first meet Vergil in DmC 3, there are 3 fights between him and Dante. In the first fight, Vergil clearly defeats Dante. In the second fight, they tie, and then by the third fight, Dante wins. And the reason why Dante wins is because he's able to integrate both the human and devil aspects of himself. Vergil is just ashamed of the human side of him, and he's focused on the devil side, and he's focused on gaining more power. But Dante is more fully able to embrace the aspects of himself that are both human and demonic. Because in the original game series, the twins, Dante and Vergil, are half human and half devil. But then in the reboot in DmC Devil May Cry, they are half angel, half demon. And so in the original games, basically, I'm saying that Vergil has a lot going for him. Even though he is an antagonist, even though he is a villain, even though he is literally trying to open a portal to hell in the third game. In spite of all that, I think they're still able to make him a sympathetic character. And it is through fighting Vergil that Dante basically awakes his demonic powers, he gains his devil trigger, and it is through fighting Vergil that Dante is more or less able to uncover who he truly is. In DmC Devil May Cry, though, Vergil is, I don't know, he's kind of like a hacker. And this is especially noteworthy in the original games. Vergil would not use human guns. He used summon swords, but he wouldn't touch human weapons at all. And that's very much a big part of his character, is the rejection of the human. And then you cut to Vergil in DmC Devil May Cry, And it's a completely different take on the character. This guy wears a fedora. I don't know why. It was a big enough deal though that whenever they re-released this game for the PS4, I think, they took they took the fedora, they took Vergil's fedora away from him. But basically this version of the character is he's kind of like smart, but he's kind of weak. And Vergil does show Dante who he is because he says, hey, check out our family home. This is where we used to live as a family. Because Dante has amnesia at the beginning of the game and he doesn't really know who he is. He doesn't know about his angelic or demonic heritage, and I guess that he thinks that he can just fight guys suspended in the air for no reason. I guess he thinks that it's just normal to be able to fly up in the air for, 1,000 seconds or whatever. He never questions it, and I don't know, that's kind of silly. And Vergil, I think, is driven by a similar lust for power as he is in the original games, but it's less so the the desire for power to protect what he loves and more so a desire for power because he wants to rule the world. And so as is evidenced by his willingness to hack computers, Vergil has no issue with using human tools or weapons. Vergil has a car in this game. He has the Vergil mobile. That's not what it's called, that's just what I'm calling it. And it has a giant V where the GPS would go. And so I don't really know why he has a car, but he does. And also there's the part in the game where Vergil commits a sniper rifle abortion. Yeah, I don't really, I'm starting to question the entire point of this video, which is that DmC could have been great. But whenever I said the word sniper rifle abortion, I was like, I don't know actually. Maybe this game was actually kind of doomed from the start. I mean, if someone, outlined like, yeah, we're going to have Vergil with a sniper rifle and he's going to shoot a demonic chick's womb and then he's going to shoot her through the head and then they're going to run away. I don't know. That's just kind of, why? That's not, I don't even know how I'm supposed to like explain this. Like that's stupid. That should have been cut. Long story short, I wanted to talk about the main characters. I wanted to talk about the two brothers at first because they are like the most egregious parts of the game, I think. And I think this is the primary reason why people say that this is a bad Devil May Cry game, but a good game, because the characters just don't feel like the characters who we know and love. Dante doesn't feel like Dante, Vergil doesn't feel like Vergil. And of course, whenever someone reboots something or does an alternate version, you have different characters, you have different aspects of a character that are revealed. But in this case, it just feels like completely different characters. It feels like there are very few, if any, similarities between Dante and Vergil and Vergil. And I also want to point out that what I've been talking about so far is primarily about the story. And really, that is the biggest gripe that people have with this game, is the story. Because honestly, there are a lot of great things about this game. Let's talk about the art direction for a bit. It is probably the best in the series. And don't get me wrong, I do prefer the aesthetics of like Devil May Cry 3, for instance, which is much more horror-based and horror-focused. That game has Ngl I, which is this giant demonic castle that rises from the ground and ascends to the skies. And it has a bunch of skeletons with wings, a bunch of Grim Reapers, Angels of Death. And that game has endless abysses, and it has, spiky stairs or whatever the frick else. So I'm a much bigger fan of that sort of aesthetic, especially when it comes to Devil May Cry, because I feel like Devil May Cry benefits from having those sort of horror influences. And really, that's one of my favorite things about Devil May Cry, is the horror aspect of it. And so I'm not dismissing that whenever I'm saying that this game has some of the best art direction in the series, but really this game has art direction that is more creative than probably any other game in the series. I love DmC 5, I love Devil May Cry 5, I think that they kind of redeemed the series after this game, but ultimately this game has better art direction than that one. This game is just a lot more inventive and creative with some of the levels. Like the club level is freaking brilliant. The club level is one of the most interesting levels in any Devil May Cry game. If you just look at it, it's beautiful. They do a lot of really cool things with the lighting. And honestly, I want to just keep on talking about it because I want to be able to show more of it off, behind me, but I just don't have that much to say other than it's freaking gorgeous. You have that, and you have the boss fight with Barbas. Basically, the lead up to that is awesome, where you're stuck in a television screen, and then you go and you fight him, and it's this big, elaborate fight. But then the cool thing about that is he sucks you into the TV, and then you have to fight guys while you're being broadcast on the news. I think that's freaking awesome. So it's a boss fight, but at the same time, you do fight a lot of like just standard grunts during the boss fight. And that's like one of the coolest things about this game. There's a section towards the end of the game where it's like the second to last level. That's awesome, where you're in this set of caverns, you're in this cave system. There are a lot of blues and greens in it, and it's really beautiful. There's the part where you're running through Mundus's giant tower, basically, and Kat, prior to this, was drawing out directions and where to go. She was drawing a map, and in this section of the game, you see the map outline, basically. As you're progressing, you'll just see Kat's chalk drawings and They tell you where to go in which direction, and it's awesome. And all in all, this is just a super colorful game, and I love that about it. I think it's just very pretty and beautiful to look at. And this is one of those instances where going in a completely different direction than the original series actually paid off completely. And again, I love the horror aspects of Devil May Cry, but they didn't really go with that aesthetic for this game, and honestly, it's okay, I guess. Just because the game is so colorful and so beautiful. If it's not clear from looking at my thumbnails, I like stuff that's colorful. I think it's pretty. So this is certainly a direction that like completely paid off, basically. I did want to touch on the satire aspect of this game because this is an aspect that I think was really controversial, but I think it could have been really good. Basically in this game, there's this entire sort of thing that Dante learns, which is just that demons control everything. Demons control the media, and they control finances, and they control consumption and gluttony. They control the soda companies. And so I think that's kind of an interesting aspect to take a Devil May Cry game in, just because of the fact that like that's not how any of the other games are. And I like stuff like American Psycho. I think satire can be really cool when done well. But that's kind of the issue, is that the satire in this game is not done well because it's so freaking surface level. So for instance, you go to the finance wing of Mundus's company or building or whatever, and then Kat's like, these people work in finance and they barely have a soul.
This is the finance wing. Those who work here are barely human anymore. They have been corrupted beyond recognition.
Or different words will pop up on the walls, you know, whenever Dante runs into the soda factory. It's like gluttony and obesity and greed and blah, blah, blah. And so I think that's really kind of the issue with the social critique or criticism and the satire. It's deep as a puddle, basically. It's so surface level and uninteresting. Basically, it's just saying, yep, greed is bad. Gluttony is bad. Believing lies that are broadcast to you through the television is bad. And it's like, that's true. That's true. I cannot disagree with any of that. It's all true. But that's sort of the thing, is that it just kind of feels preachy as a result. It feels preachy, but more than that, it feels juvenile. And it sets Dante up as being this sort of rebellious figure who's trying to take down the man. Because everything bad in this game is a result of demons. And that's actually a big gripe that I have with the satire. Because it's always revealed that like, oh yeah, the person responsible for this bad thing is actually a demon. And I get that this is Devil May Cry and it's a game about fighting demons. But at the same time, not everyone who does something bad is a demon, because honestly, there are a lot of people who are just bad people. And this is something that DmC 3 acknowledged whenever you had a character like Arkham, who was a human. Arkham assisted Vergil, and he eventually becomes a demon himself. And really, that's one of the major themes of that game, is that it doesn't matter whether or not someone is a human or a devil. They can be evil either way, or they can be good either way. In essence, who you are born as does not define you. We are all masters of our destiny, that sort of thing. And I think that's a really good and beautiful message. And then DmC Devil May Cry kind of throws all that crap away, and it's like, well, no, humans are inherently good, which I think is a good thing. I don't have a problem with that. But the issue is that it turns that around and it says anything bad in the human world is because of demons. And basically the issue that I have with that is that it takes the responsibility away from humans. Because the fact of the matter is that we live in this world, and there are some very evil human beings. There are people who run these corporations and who treat people horribly. Human beings hurt other human beings, and they're just bad people. You know, that's all there is to it. And so for the game to kind of like take that away and say, oh no, they're actually a demon, that's kind of, it feels like you're letting people off the hook, and it feels almost, I don't know, dismissive of other people's experiences. I don't know if that's right. But it's just always felt weird to me that they don't have like an evil human to balance things out. It feels weird to me that they don't have a person like Arkham, or you don't have a person like some of the characters in Devil May Cry 4. It feels weird to me that you don't have like an Arius or whatever, like a human character who wants to become a demon. It feels weird to me that that's kind of the message of the game. I will say though, whenever this game came out, I thought that the satire, you know, Bob Barbas being Bill O'Reilly, I thought that was too on the nose. And I kind of saw this and I was like, bro, you know, Fox News sucks, but like, you don't have to literally put it in your game as Raptor News, because it is the most see-through, transparent kind of satire ever, which is just, oh yeah, this person is actually a demon. And whenever this game came out 12 years ago, I was like, yeah, this guy sucks, I know. And that was part of what made the satire feel like so on the nose for me. But then stuff came out about Bill O'Reilly, and it's like he paid off a woman like $15 million or something. And so in other words, he did something really bad, you know, something so bad that he had to pay her $15 million. And it's like, you look at that and it's like, what the frick did he do? Because even if you look at someone like Trump, you know, someone who like, you know, has a history of paying people off, $15 million is not like what they pay. Elon Musk, whenever he's trying to pay people off, he's literally the richest guy ever. I think he's offered them like a couple $100,000 or something. Bill O'Reilly is paying some woman $15 million. What the frick? And so anyways, I guess DmC Devil May Cry was right about that. Bill O'Reilly must be a literal demon. And so I gotta hand it to him, like, Bill O'Reilly sucks, but like, I didn't know he sucked that much, you know? And so I think the satire aspect could have been handled better. I don't think it's a bad fit for Devil May Cry necessarily, because this is a game about fighting demons, and this is a game about rebellion. You know, Dante's sword is literally called Rebellion. But I do feel like they should have done something more with it. They should have done something more with the satire, because really it feels like they don't have anything to say other than like, screw the system, screw Coca-Cola, screw corporations and the finance wings, screw Fox News, you know. And it's like, I can get behind all of these things, but at the same time, like, I feel like you should be doing something more interesting. I feel like you should be saying something more interesting, especially if you're inserting it into a Devil May Cry game. And so this is sort of one of the aspects that I'm talking about whenever I say that DmC Devil May Cry could have been great. This could have been a really interesting twist on the game, but as it stands now, it just kind of feels underbaked. It feels a bit silly. It feels a bit easy to mock and to make fun of, and it just doesn't feel all that deep. And so it's taken me this long to get to the gameplay section, and the reason why is because I don't have all that much to say about it. The gameplay isn't as deep as the other Devil May Cry games. You are missing the style system that you had as Dante in the previous games, and you're missing the sort of rhythm game charge-up thing that you had with Nero and Devil May Cry 4, but really it just feels like they tried to give Dante some variation of more or less every move in the series, and they were trying to make Dante a lot easier to play in the sense that they were trying to grab new players. For the most part, the gameplay is pretty fun. There are a lot of things that players have gripes with, so for instance, the color-coded enemies are kind of silly. Basically, the game says that you can only hit red enemies with red weapons, and then you can only hit blue enemies with blue weapons, and it's kind of doofy. I think the Devil May Cry series has pretty much always had enemies that like kind of suck to fight sometimes, like DmC 3 had like the Fallen, which if you don't remember those guys, they're the guys who look like angels, and you have to defeat their wings basically. And then they have like a giant face on their torso. And those guys have always kind of sucked because they can like phase through things, and so you know, you have to like chase them down because they can fly. Those guys kind of suck. Also in DmC 3, you do have the blood goils, and basically if you hit those with melee weapons, then they just split in half and they multiply. And so what that means is that you have to shoot them and they turn to stone, and then you can attack them. And so there have always been annoying enemies in the Devil May Cry games. And if I'm being completely honest, the red and blue type enemies just aren't as annoying as those guys. But still, you know, just because they're not as annoying, it's still a bit annoying. And the same re-release that took out Vergil's Fedora also took this out. If I'm not mistaken, I think it made it to where you could hit any enemy type with any weapon, but I don't have access to that because I play on PC. And so what that means is that all the footage you see is from the original version of the game. And so Dante's gameplay is not as deep as it is in other games. You don't have the same sorts of crazy insane combos that you have in like DmC 3 or 4 or, you know, afterwards in 5. But in spite of that, and in spite of the fact that they took away the style system from Dante, it still feels like they tried to cram as many moves as possible into the weapons list. Basically, Dante has 5 melee weapons and he has 3 guns, and so that's like a really good freaking balance. And I think they were able to do a really good job of like simplifying a lot of Dante's control scheme, because the style system, you know, and having to switch between different moves with the D-pad and all that is really like unfriendly to new players. And so I completely understand the urge to get rid of that and to simplify it. And I don't even think that's a bad thing necessarily, but it is if you're losing moves. And ultimately, I do think that's kind of what happened. It feels like in the other games you have a lot more movement options with Dante, particularly with Trickster. And in DmC 3 you do get some unique styles, so you get Quicksilver, for instance, which slows down time, which is an ability, by the way, that Dante has in the story of this game for like no reason. Like the part with the car chase where Vergil is being chased and running away, and I don't know, Dante like stops time. It's really weird. It's never explained, because in DmC 3 he gets the Quicksilver ability whenever he defeats Garyon, but like in this game it just looks like he can like slow down time, like just I don't know, it's not explained. But in spite of Dante being a lot more simplified, I still think he's pretty fun to play. I did find myself wishing for certain moves that I had in previous Devil May Cry games. Like, I think it's really weird that he doesn't have a run. And so what that means is that Dante's fastest movement option is to just angel dash everywhere, which looks extremely silly. And they tried to give him some of Nero's moves. So for instance, you have like the angel hook and the demon hook or whatever. And those moves sort of replaced the trickster teleports, and they also replaced Nero's grabby arm, his Devil Bringer. And so I think the game does play pretty well, but it's certainly not as fast as the original games. And it does feel like your movement options are somewhat limited and restricted, but at the same time it still plays pretty well. It's still a pretty fun game. And one thing I actually really love about this game is the fact that they introduced platforming. The platforming sections aren't really all that difficult, but I think they're kind of fun. It's a nice return to games like Jak and Daxter, which I love. And I think that the platforming is just kind of a nice little way to break things up. So as I said earlier, from what I understand, Capcom did encourage Ninja Theory to push in their own directions and to make Devil May Cry their own sort of project. And I think that's a good thing to do typically. I think it's a bad idea to try to replicate someone else's project or their ideas or their work. I think that you have to take something anytime you have it and make it your own. And most of us will not have the chance to renovate a legendary gaming franchise, but typically speaking, I think that you see this a lot whenever you see people who are writers, where they're trying to, find their voice, and so what they inevitably do is they just try to replicate someone else's style for a bit. This is something that Lovecraft struggled with because he felt like he had his own Lord Dunsany stories, or he felt like he had his Edgar Allan Poe type stories, but he didn't feel like he had any Lovecraft type stories. And so I think that it should be expected that whenever a new developer takes over a gaming series, that they're going to put their own spin on it. I think that's something that is inevitable. And I think that taking pre-existing concepts and modifying them until they are your own is a great way to go about creating something new. And in a lot of ways, I think that's kind of what Ninja Theory did with Dante and Devil May Cry with this game. The original games had more of a gothy or even metal feel sometimes, especially with the music. And so they flipped that and they said, what if we made Dante a rebellious punk rocker? As I said earlier, the original games were Japanese, but Ninja Theory are a British developer, and so they were never going to be Japanese like the original. And so in a lot of ways, it does feel like Ninja Theory took Devil May Cry and they put their own twist on it. But the problem with that is that this game, DmC Devil May Cry, is not a new thing. DmC Devil May Cry is a reboot of the Devil May Cry series. And so while I was playing this game, I was hit by waves of frustration, and I think that's a large part of it for me, because the game feels like it's trying to do its own thing, but at the same time, it still feels like it's beholden to the original Devil May Cry series, so they have to give the characters familiar names, and also they have to have familiar concepts, and they have to have familiar ideas, but at the same time, it's not the original games, and so it feels like there's this weird mash. Whenever the very first trailer for the game dropped, I thought it looked really interesting, just because of the fact that it looked like Dante was locked up in a mental institution. And I found this idea to be really interesting, basically, the idea of him being tortured by demons, and I don't know, it just feels like a very different direction for DmC. And so I was excited by that, but then they kind of just dropped that in the main game. And this is part of what I mean whenever I say that this game is being pulled in two separate directions. It's being pulled in the direction of the original series and in the direction of them trying to do their own thing. Because it feels like this would have been a really interesting, cool way to go about things, but then, they cut it because it wasn't like the original series, probably, if I had to guess. It feels like there's this weird conflict between the game trying to go off in a new direction while also still retaining elements of the old. And so because of that, the game stirred up all these weird feelings in me, because I kept on feeling that, like, if it were just called something else, if it were not called Devil May Cry, it would be a good game, it would be maybe even seen as a great game, but at the same time, it's not something else. It is Devil May Cry. It is called Devil May Cry. DmC Devil May Cry benefited from the Devil May Cry name and the goodwill of the other games, and so as a result, it is held to the standards of previous Devil May Cry games. And so that's one thing that people say a lot is, they'll be like, can't you judge the game on its own merits? Can't you judge the game without comparing it to Devil May Cry 3? And it's like, well, no, because it's a Devil May Cry game. And more than being a Devil May Cry game, it was initially intended to serve as a replacement for the original Devil May Cry series. That was a large part of why the game was received so poorly, right? Because you're replacing the original Dante, who is funny and very likable, with a version of Dante that is just unlikable. But I think one of the most interesting things about this game is just how much of it was folded into Devil May Cry 5 whenever it came out. See, this doesn't really happen. It's hard for me to think of another instance where this has ever happened before, where basically Devil May Cry 4 came out and Capcom was dissatisfied with the sales, and so they rebooted the series, right? And that's what DmC Devil May Cry is it's a reboot. And then this reboot, which was meant to draw in and attract different fans and new fans of the series, it sold even worse than Devil May Cry 4. And so as a result, Capcom just went back to the old series and they made Devil May Cry 5. And that doesn't really happen where a company attempts to reboot something and then they realize that the reboot doesn't work and then they go back to the old thing. Usually what happens is you'll have a series and then you reboot it, and then if that reboot fails, they'll try a new reboot. A great example of this is the Spider-Man movies. You know, you had the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies and then you rebooted them with Andrew Garfield, and then that series failed and then they just moved on to Tom Holland. And sure, they did make a new Spider-Man movie that had all the characters together, that had Tobey Maguire and Garfield and Holland, but at the same time, they didn't go back to the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies at the start. The next Spider-Man movie will be a Tom Holland movie, not a Tobey Maguire movie. And so instead of making DmC Devil May Cry 2, they made Devil May Cry 5, and as I said, they folded in many elements of this game into that game. And so the most notable example of this is they took a lot of Dante's characterization in this game and they gave it to Nero in Devil May Cry 5. You see, in Devil May Cry 4, when Nero was introduced, he had some anger, and I think that was kind of the thing that defined him, right, in that game. It was his anger. He was really pissed off. He was a lot more pissed off than Dante ever was, and his love for Kyrie, his girlfriend. But besides that, I can't really tell you that much about him. And he does have kind of a punky attitude, but basically they took the punk style of Dante in this game and they just gave it to Nero in Devil May Cry 5. Dante has a trailer in DmC Devil May Cry, and Nero has a RV in DmC 5. Dante has short hair in this game, Nero has it in 5. Dante swears quite a bit in this game, Nero does in 5. And this could be seen as a little bit of an oversimplification, and maybe it is, but at the same time, the characterization of Nero in DmC 5 was very much influenced by the characterization of Dante in this game. And so as I'm saying, there are aspects of DmC Devil May Cry that absolutely could have worked if they were adjusted or if they were changed slightly, and I think this is one of them. I think a more punky protagonist works a lot for Devil May Cry, but just not the way that it does here. The entire first section of this video was me talking about the characterization of Dante and why it's flawed. And really, that's kind of the thing, is that the characterization of Dante in this game just sucks. And I do think that if you made Dante's design in this game a bit closer to the original, if you just gave him a red jacket and white hair, and I think that if you just took his characterization and made it a little bit closer to the original, then I think that 90% of the problems that people have with this game would have been solved. Or if you just changed the name of the game and you didn't call it Devil May Cry, then again, I think 90% of the problems that people have with this game would have been solved. Because this game has a lot of great ideas, but it just isn't fully able to realize them because of its connections to the original Devil May Cry. And so I think that's a large part of why this game is so frustrating to me. Because I think you have a lot of great ideas here, but they're just not always executed perfectly. I also feel the need to mention Ninja Theory's entire antagonism towards fans. Basically, in a lot of interviews that the game director did, it just felt like he was very dismissive towards fans of the original series. You have a cutscene at the very beginning of this game where Dante gets a white wig on him and then he says, "Not in a million years." And so a lot of people interpreted that as being a dig at the original fans. People accused the game director of making Dante look like himself, and there were some slides from an internal presentation at Ninja Theory that leaked that were like seen as vaguely homophobic, and they show what Dante is and what he isn't, and according to them, he is like a crackhead, but he is not a gay cowboy. And then the great irony of that is that in Devil May Cry 5, they give Dante a cowboy hat as a weapon, and so that's pretty funny, I think. But really, that's just kind of like PR 101, you know, don't insult or mock the people you're trying to sell something to. And I think that's one of the core issues with how this game was received, basically, was just the publicity. And to be fair, you did have a lot of fans who showed up and who were aggressive towards Ninja Theory because basically Ninja Theory came in and then they completely changed the Devil May Cry franchise. And what Ninja Theory should have done is they should have tried to extend an olive branch to him and been like, look, we're doing our own take on the franchise, but we have a great respect for the original. But really, that's not what happened. Instead, you just had Ninja Theory insulting fans, and so that just made Ninja Theory look bad. And like, that's just kind of stupid, because in order to be successful, you know, in order for a game to get sales, you have to have people to sell the game to. And so if you're alienating your audience, like, you're not going to get any freaking sales. And so I don't know how many copies the game has sold now, but at the time it came out, it had trouble selling even 1 million copies, and for reference, DmC 4 I think sold 2.5 million. And so really, I think this is just like a weird, complicated mess of a game. And it's weird because it doesn't feel like it fully executes on its vision because of its ties to the original Devil May Cry. But on the opposite side, it feels like it's not a real Devil May Cry game because it just isn't similar enough to those games. It doesn't have enough of the same themes or anything. And so with all that being said, I wanted to ask one final question, which is, what is the legacy of this game? I think that since Devil May Cry 5 came out, and since it came out like 5 years ago, and since we have a DmC anime dropping in April, I think that this game has, it hasn't been forgotten exactly, but it's kind of been washed away like a bad memory. Or washed away is too strong of a word, but it's kind of receded into the background. It's kind of faded away to a certain extent. Whenever people talk about Devil May Cry, you don't really hear them talking about the reboot at this point in time. And again, the reason why is because Devil May Cry 5 came out and it absolutely wiped the floor with this game. Devil May Cry 5 is phenomenal. It is easily like one of the best 2 games in the series. And the reason I say that is because I think 3 and 5 are the best games. A lot of people like 4, but I'm not really all that into 4 if I'm being honest. And so really people don't talk about this game too much at this point in time. And the reason why is because the wrong of this game has been righted by the existence of Devil May Cry 5. Whenever this game dropped, it looked like the original Dante was going away forever, and it looked like this game basically killed off the series. Like seriously, everyone thought that the series was dead after this game because it sold so poorly. But fortunately, that wasn't the case. Fortunately, they made Devil May Cry 5, which I think is the best selling game in the series by far. And so in my mind, that's kind of how this game has come to be viewed, almost, is it's like a weird little accident. It's hard to believe this, but this game came out in 2013, which was 12 years after the release of the original Devil May Cry, and as it stands, this video is coming out in 2025, which is 12 years after the release of this game. So we are the same distance to this game as it was to the original Devil May Cry. And pretty obviously, I think this game has not had as big of an influence on the gaming genre as Devil May Cry 1. And the reason why is because Devil May Cry 1 pretty much invented the hack and slash genre. And so despite the fact that we haven't gotten a Devil May Cry 6, despite the fact that Itsuno has left Capcom, meaning that the future of the Devil May Cry series is kind of up in the air, and despite the fact that it's been like 5 or 6 years since Devil May Cry 5 dropped, despite all of that, we're still getting the Devil May Cry anime, which hopefully will be great. I think it will be. I think it'll be really excellent. Fingers crossed. And in a lot of ways, it feels to me like Devil May Cry is bigger than it ever has been. And it could just be my perspective on things, but it does feel like it's gotten more popular. It does feel like a lot of people I know have seen the cowboy Dante hat dance scene if they haven't played the game. And really, I think I'm hopeful for the future of Devil May Cry as a series. And one last thing I wanted to touch on before we go is the Vergil DLC for this game. This is the only Devil May Cry game to have given Vergil a unique special campaign, which is weird considering that Vergil has been a playable character in almost every Devil May Cry game aside from the first 2. But in 3, 4, and 5, he's been like an extra bonus character, like a special edition character. And so as a result, they've never given him unique levels to play. And so at the end of DmC Devil May Cry, Dante and Vergil get into a big fight. Dante stabs Vergil through the chest, and then Vergil teleports away and dies. Like straight up, the DLC starts with Vergil actually dying. And the premise of the DLC basically is that Vergil fights his way through hell, and then he becomes more powerful, and then he comes back stronger than ever. And he looks really stupid. Like straight up, this final design for Vergil is freaking awful. Like he looks so stupid. He looks like Iceman from the X-Men. It's such a bad design, I think. Like it's so cartoony and silly, and it's weird to me because he looks more like an anime character here than he does in the original games. But the Vergil DLC just isn't very fun. He doesn't have as many moves as Dante. You could tell that the budget was definitely slashed for this DLC because a lot of the cutscenes are done through these animatics. Darksiders is another game that used this style of animation for certain parts of the game, and the reason why is because it's cheaper than having an actual 3D rendered cutscene. And so I don't have a problem with it aside from the fact that like it's inconsistent with the rest of the game. So some cutscenes in the DLC are done in the style, and then others are done in like the typical game style where it just shows the character models moving. And so it does feel like there's a weird kind of like mismatch in the animation department. But really, the DLC is kind of bad. It just reuses levels. It reuses parts of the original game in the DLC and it changes them a bit. But then worse than that, the issue is that the final level of the DLC is the same as the first level of the DLC, if I'm not mistaken, or at least the first part of that last level is. And so what that means is that by the time you reach the end of the DLC, you've actually played through that level 3 times because of the fact that you played it in the main game and then you repeated it in the DLC and then you repeated it a second time in the DLC. And so the DLC just doesn't really do the game any favors. And so in the end, DmC Devil May Cry is kind of a weird game. It's kind of a weird anomaly. It came out during a period whenever a lot of Japanese developers were trying to replicate Western games. Call of Duty was the big thing, Grand Theft Auto was big, and like Red Dead Redemption, Fallout 3. And so as a result, I feel like Capcom felt the need to ditch the entire Japanese anime aesthetic and to go with something Western, which of course the anime aesthetic is very big in the West right now and has very much returned. And so the game just kind of feels like a weird little thing. It feels like a weird slip of judgment from Capcom, and I don't think the game is bad. I think the game had a lot of really great ideas, but yeah, it doesn't really execute on all of them all that well. So this is what I have to say. Thank you for watching. I hope the anime is good, and thank you. Rollin', 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 yeah! Rollin', 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 come on! Rollin', 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 yeah! Now I know you'll be loving this right here. All you B biscuit is right here, and people in the house, put your hands in the air, cause if you don't care, we don't care. Don't just for your fix of the Limp Biscuit mix. So where the you at? Shut the up, back the this track up. Put your hands up, put your hands up, put your hands up, put your hands up, put your hands up. Rollin', 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 come on! Rollin', 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 yeah!